Okay, so welcome everyone to Top 10 and ECF's Top 10 Annual Giving Strategies. My name is Brendan Hunter. I am a Program Director at the Episcopal Church Foundation, joining you from ECF's office in New York. So glad that you are taking the time out of your summer days. I hope some of you are still enjoying some of these lovely summery days we have, or some vacation time to actually, well, hopefully you're not taking out time out of vacations to do this, but if you are, even better, to go over the important topic of stewardship and annual giving in specific. We just want to cover a few technical notes before we get started. Just want to let everyone know that everyone is on mute. To cut down on audio interference, please open up the chat box if you haven't already done that. That's in the upper left-hand side of your screen. Press that chat, just the word chat, and the box should open up. Put your comments, questions at any time. I will be monitoring that chat box to making sure that Erin gets around to your questions or comments. If she's not able to do that at that time, we'll also have time to pause for questions and comments, and so I can go back and fish those up and make sure that Erin gets those, addresses those for you. We are also broadcasting live on Facebook, so I will also be addressing any comments or questions that are being put on our Facebook page as well. So I also want to just bear that in mind for folks when you are asking questions or making comments, that if there is anything that's particularly sensitive or perhaps verging on the level of confidential, you can always contact us outside of this webinar. We'll share our contact information, and you can speak to Erin or myself outside of that if it seems a little bit more sensitive. And last but not least, copy the slides, posted that link into the chat box. If this is not a good time for you to download those slides, we'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone registered this evening with a link to download the slides as well as to view the recording. So we'll flip over just real quickly. For those of you who are not familiar with the Episcopal Church Foundation, we are an independent lay-led organization that was founded in 1949. Our mission is to strengthen the leadership, strategic, and financial capabilities of Episcopal diocese congregations and other organizations like camps and conference centers, charities, religious organizations within the Episcopal Church. You can see our 4 desired impacts that we're trying to achieve up on your screen. And we do this through a variety of wonderful programs, including our Strategic Solutions Program, which Erin is the program director of, and she can tell you more about that as well. Capital campaigns, we do planned giving, endowment management solutions, including helping with investing your congregation's endowment to setting up structures and rules for endowments. We have leadership resources through our Vital Teams program, ECF Vital Practices. If you don't subscribe to vestry papers, please take a moment after this webinar to go to ecfvp.org and subscribe there. And so if you haven't already, check out our website, episcopalfoundation.org, for all of our various programs and services for your congregation, and as well to check out other opportunities for webinars too that are coming up this fall. So without further ado, I will hand it over to our presenter this evening, Erin. Take it away.
Oh, thank you, Brendan, and thank you for all your help and support. I'm very excited about this topic this evening. It's been one that I've been monitoring closely. You see, the fundraising landscape has shifted significantly. The context for giving at your parish, at any parish, it's based on a number of needs. It's based on the needs of their parishioners, current cultural trends, and the theology of giving provided, all of which have changed over the past 5 years. And what we're seeing is that advocacy-based organizations saw a rise in giving over the last year. And the language of abundance may not be resonating with those that are in your community any longer. This webinar, what you can hope to get out of our time together, it's designed to provide you not only with 10 current practical strategies, but some important, noteworthy new language to frame the why of fundraising. Prior to the previous election, the presidential election, the landscape had shifted, and right around the late 1960s, early 1970s, from a paradigm of giving of we're all in this together, from a paradigm of some would use the word obligation, of uniformity and loyalty, everyone doing their part. It shifted. And we saw that even more so in the late 2000s, where social entrepreneurship was on the rise, as was the start of many family foundations. Simply, people didn't give uniformly to their parish any longer. The singular gift was not seen as much. Rather, people gave to a variety of different organizations, and the language of prioritization to a singular church, to a singular entity, became the language of the parish where things were tracking. So, for example, a strategy would be, I know that you are giving to a variety of different organizations in our community. I ask that you prioritize our parish over others. However, and since the last election, we saw an even greater new shift in the landscape. Two new motivations arose. Neither had been previously articulated or even, frankly, had been noted as significant until last November: rage and catharsis. And what we saw was a number of different organizations that created an opportunity for people to give out of these new motivations. ACCL, for example, reported a record giving last year, as did planned giving. People are looking for ways to gain agency in a time where they may be feeling a sense of disenchantment with institutions. So I wanted to show you this as an example. For those that might be doubting about rage and catharsis, this was an example of a site that was created just mere days after the last presidential election. And what happens here is that a person can scroll through these different quotes, and based on the issue, can be directed in their charitable giving. For what reason? You'll note here they don't give any level of impact. They're not going to tell you transparently how your gift is going to be used, as was the shift from the 1960s and 70s. Rather, they're connecting with potential donors' deep need to direct their energy around rage and catharsis. This is a very significant change in how we do fundraising. What we don't know is, has giving substantially increased as a country, or have people shifted their charitable giving to other categories? So what you'll see here are some of the various articles that can be pulled. We don't know if this is a short-term shift or if this is going to be the long term. But what we do know is that none of the data that was published from 2016 that we would normally go to look for this sort of information reflects and isolates November and December. It averages giving over the entire last year. So we're going to have to wait another year before we know the impact of what this fundraising shift will mean. So I've given you a bit of context before we talk about practical strategies, because it's important for me to be able to communicate why some of these strategies would connect at this particular time and place. You see, large institutions which remain non-political face a particular challenge, and I'm sure some of you might be shaking your heads right now, because there's a sense in which there are new donor values and donor motivations, and figuring out how to align your missional identity with those values can be a challenge, especially as social justice and advocacy groups are seeing unprecedented levels of giving. So, my hope tonight is to provide some very practical strategies that can address this changing landscape. What we do know is that those parishes who have been able to either take a political stand or align their missional identity with a new or current donor values have seen increases over the last year, both in terms of membership and in terms of giving as a whole. Some churches have adopted an approach that's familiar, pledging to give out of their pledged donations to advocacy-based organizations. For example, Middle Collegiate Church noted that 10% from their last campaign were going to go to post-Clinton efforts, making sure that some of the social services that they were concerned were going to be impacted by the last election would still be fully funded. Other parishes have identified funding for refugee ministries, sanctuary churches, etc., as ways in which folks, instead of, as I was describing earlier with the late 2000s, instead of spreading out donations in a broad approach, would direct their giving in a singular way to your parish, knowing that you potentially might be giving out of your outreach budget to advocacy-based organizations that they care about. Another way in which we are seeing an increase is if you are not going to be politically aligned, which you do not have to be, looking for ways in which you align those needs around rage and catharsis with your missional identity and value. So the number one strategy then becomes, we share your concern for X, Y, and Z. Please join us in giving to help repair our world in this X, Y, and Z way through our ministries. This is a huge opportunity for churches, and it's an exciting one. The reason why it's exciting is because the church is relevant. It's relevant now, and this is a great way for us to show our relevance within the broader culture. This is why the why matters, because this is how you communicate how your parish matters to the world. So, strategy 1, change the language of why. Theologies of giving are important, and we all have a theology of giving. Even if it's not articulated, we all have a way in which we view how our giving impacts our relationship to the church, to God, and the world. One time I had an individual, actually it was just a couple months ago, say, imagine the ministry we can do once we've received these funds. And they were very excited. And I got excited too. I love dreaming about what's possible together and keeping a parish's eye on a common goal. Yet, when we fixate on the goal alone, we're tempted to miss a really important point. The process of fundraising is itself a powerful and it's a life-giving ministry. In the Jewish tradition, there's a theology of charitable giving. Perhaps you've heard of it before. It's called Tikkun Olam, in which God gives us the ministry to repair or to fix the world. In the Episcopal Church, in our own theology, we have the baptismal covenant, where we commit our lives to reconciling ourselves to God and to one another. When fundraising is a ministry, lives are transformed in the giving of gifts to change and to repair a broken world as we reconcile ourselves to God. How does this happen? It begins with the act of inviting others to give, where requiring both the person inviting and the person receiving the invitation to explore their relationship with money. When considering a gift, one can mindfully ask how their own finances are impacting their health and wellness, while asking also how to respond to God's presence in their lives. This is an opportunity to invite others to draw closer to a life-changing God through their giving. That's an enormous gift. It's also an opportunity. In a time where values-based advocacy groups are seeing increases in their giving, for people to make meaning of their lives and strengthen their individual sense of agency in the world. People are giving to advocacy-based agencies because they want to make meaning. Humans are at our best, I believe, when we're about the work of repair and reconciliation. We feel the craving for this work right now very deeply. The Episcopal Church provides a powerful opportunity for people to do this work, to invest their resources in God's kingdom and to align their values with giving. Moving on from the why. Another key strategy. Episcopalians are not a monolithic body. Hayden Shaw, Generation Intelligence researcher, notes, today, for the first time in history, we have count them, 5 generations in our families, churches, and communities. That's a huge change. And it causes quite a shakeup because every generation is pushing to be heard and to understand, to find their own way, and to recover what they feel the previous generation may have fumbled, and to work out their parents' unfinished business. That's from Hayden Shaw. So I like to tell this story. This winter, my son and I, we went to the doctor's office for our annual treating of strep throat. Happens every year. Have you ever taken a strep culture test? Have you ever had it performed? Let me tell you what happens. What they do is they insert a Q-tip-like instrument into the very back of your mouth, and it always produces, no matter who you are, this gag reflex in patients. Now, when they approached my 8-year-old son, the doctor had a magical narrative, walked very precisely through what was going to happen, had all sorts of distractions involved, wanting to ensure that my son wasn't scared. For me, the doctor had no need to prolong this torture. In and out, knew that I just needed it to be quick and let's get going. The doctor knew that my son and I were not the same, knew enough about our differences that he adapted his approach. My son needed time and needed patience. I just needed that swab to be done quickly. The doctor knew that we needed him to adjust his approach accordingly. And the same is done every day with ministry. Lay priests and ordained priests, lay persons and ordained priests alike meet with individuals for pastoral care and have very different conversations if the person is age 15 or age 75. If it's a person in a rural area or a person in the city. If a person has a history that requires a sensitive approach, if a person has special needs, gender, race, culture, these are all variables that are to be factored into this interaction. When fundraising is a ministry, the invitation to give becomes an opportunity for transformation. This means a one-size-fits-all approach is not only ineffectual, I would argue it could potentially be pastorally inappropriate. This may mean moving beyond a singular letter or set of texts and seeking to adapt your parish's approach to the various needs of those that are found in your pews. So, what's a way to do that? A very practical way is to find out who is in your pews. who is showing up on a Sunday morning and who's giving? Segment out your donor lists. These are some suggestions, and these might be some what I would call low-hanging fruit for your segmentation. Those who gave in previous years, but maybe not last year. Those that are new to your parish. Those who give one time a year, who could become regular pledgers. And those who make gifts between that 500 to 2,000 mark, who might have capacity for greater gifts. When you look at those names, determine what would be the appropriate invitation based on their potential need. Are they a person that would need to have an authority figure go visit them in a face-to-face meeting? Are they a person that may not have a lot of time? Are they a person that needs a peer-to-peer approach? The most effective strategy, it's statistically still proven, is the face-to-face direct invitation. This continues to be the standard. The letter response rate, we often see the Chronicle of Philanthropy reports a 1% to 3% response rate. A face-to-face for the average nonprofit sees a response rate of 21%. If you're a church, that number doubles. So think about who are in your pews and what are their needs in order to make this a ministry. Rethink the phrase, it's their fault that they're not tracking. I will be the first to say that the struggle is indeed real. Many a stewardship chair has wondered how many times the same message has to be communicated in various forms to be heard. Added to what we just learned about different people having different needs, we have an important challenge. And the answer is simple. People won't give if they aren't aware that they're being invited. And in the end, everyone loses when an invitation isn't heard. In addition, if those in the pews do have diverse needs, then how the messages are communicated become an important component of fundraising as ministry. Ask any counselor, and you will hear that the breakdown of any relationship tends to somehow focus on communication. Before your annual campaign begins, create a plan for what ways you will communicate with the parish and how often. Facebook, email, newsletter, bulletin insert, mission moment, adult formation meeting, book study, texting. Create a plan using the tools you have available. It may mean using multiple voices, repeating the same message. Creating a plan ahead of time ensures a greater likelihood of the message to be heard. All right, I'm going to take a moment. Brendan, do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions in the moment, but would invite our participants on our webinar to use the chat box. If you haven't opened that up already, on the upper left-hand side of your screen, there are a couple of different words there. If you see chat, press that, and a chat box will pop out, and that'll give you the opportunity to ask your question. And I actually see we have somebody, Judy, has her hand raised.
Hi, Judy.
Judy is asking, what is tracking?
Tracking. What is tracking?
Could you say a little bit more about that, perhaps, Judy? And in the meantime, Sandy just asked, I'm still not sure what you meant by the title of the last slide. So maybe we can go back to that last slide and.
Sure, I'm happy to. Rethink the phrase, it's their fault that they aren't tracking. Oh, maybe we will answer two questions in a singular. Wonderful. We'll be highly efficient this evening. So it's their fault that they aren't tracking. That is a commonly used quote that I hear from many of our clients. Essentially what happens is perhaps people in frustration will say, well, we have done all that we can. We have communicated in so many ways. It's really not their fault if they don't know that we are inviting them to give to our campaign, or that they're not tracking with our ministry. And so to that response, I have to say, I have great empathy. I understand how frustrating it is to communicate the same message over and over and to not be heard. And at the same time, remembering that as we adapt our communication strategies, we're also providing people with the gift and living into this as a ministry.
Thank you, Erin. Sandy, Judy, if that made sense, let us know. If you need further clarification, and here we go. So Sandy is following up with, so you mean that they are not understanding what we are asking?
They may not understand what you are asking. What also sometimes happens is people will say, oh, I didn't know you were having a pledge campaign. Oh, it's this time of this year? Or, oh, you're having a kickoff? I had no idea. Or, oh, I didn't know where to get my pledge card or where to turn in my pledge card. These are all examples that I've heard throughout the years of ways in which people have communicated, but we're always looking for ways in which we can connect with people and ensure that our relationships remain strong. All right,
thanks,
I'm going
Erin.
to move on.
Yeah,
to the next one.
I think, and I'll just go to Rob's point about, do you have more suggestions on specific communications approaches? I think Erin's going to address a couple of those, some of those things. And if we don't get to that, let us know, Rob, and we can provide some follow-up resources as well. And then just quickly, which I think this is important before we do press on, Mike was asking, you mentioned annual campaign. Do you mean once a year or year round? I believe year-round stewardship education with the focus, with the fall pledge focus.
So when I use the word stewardship, what I mean by stewardship is a theology of giving. It's a practice, it's a ministry that takes place year-round. So stewardship would include an annual campaign. It would include your planned giving exercises, as well as any major gift or missional funding initiatives, capital campaigns that would take place throughout a 12-month cycle. So, this evening, I will be focusing specifically on annual giving strategies, which is a particular fundraising initiative within the framework of stewardship. And these pledges that you would potentially be raising will go specifically to your annual operating budget. So this would be used to fund your mission and ministry on a regular basis.
Great, thank you, Erin. And again, if you have any more questions, please go ahead and put those into the chat box. We'll go ahead and move on, but as we press ahead, we'll definitely make sure that we'll get to those, and I may also be able to type some of those responses in the chat box.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Brendan. So practical strategy number 4. When communicating, when creating your theme, creating your theology of giving, it's very important to focus on the why and not the need. I like to tell this story. I once led a workshop where I asked participants, so why are you engaged in fundraising in your parish? And I immediately heard a response from this crusty old rector. My apologies to crusty old rectors. This individual yelled out, "To pay our bills, silly." I followed up with another question that said, "So how's that going?" And the individual laughed and said, "Well, it's not going well, that's why I'm here." So chuckles ensued, and the rector was naturally chagrined. But it highlighted for me a very important lesson. People will not develop a regular discipline of giving simply because an organization needs it. They do not give simply because there is a need in a regular way. And they might in a one-time or in an episodic way, but not every year. Inviting people to give their gifts to God and to their faith community is always about the why. What are the core values of your parish? What is God doing now in your community? How will their gifts be utilized to ensure the parish's vision is made into a reality? Why would volunteering for a stewardship committee be important? And finally, why is giving to God a transformative act? These are the important whys that compel people to give. These are the important whys that oftentimes we're hearing from advocacy-based organizations that are connecting with people when they talk about transformative work in the culture around us. And this is a way in which we can connect with our parishioners' needs now. Begin each year with the why as you determine your fundraising goals and evaluate your strategies for the annual campaign. Number 5, ask for a pledge specifically. A parish was in the midst of a clergy transition a few years ago, and it opted not to engage in an annual campaign with direct invitations for giving, but simply sent out a letter with a pledge envelope. I was brought in the following year for a workshop with that vestry, and a young member raised her hand and asked a really important question. She said, "What's a pledge?" A newcomer to both the parish and to organized religion, she was unaware of the practice of pledging or its potential impact on her life. This is exciting news once again for the Episcopal Church. Very exciting news, because the Episcopal Church offers a faith tradition that is compelling and it is rich. And because of that, we cannot assume that newcomers will know either about giving, how it can be transformative, or how funds are contributing to the life of your parish, to its ministry. You can't make these assumptions anymore. The Episcopal Church keeps regular statistics about those that are in our pews. And C. Kirk Hadway, a couple years ago, published some national statistics wherein he determined that nationally over 70% of members in the Episcopal Church were not raised Episcopalian. They came from either no previous denomination affiliation, or from another denominational affiliation, or another faith tradition. this is an important place for our stewardship formation. Next strategy, tell the truth. What do you do when a previous year's fundraising effort doesn't meet your parish's goals? This image that I posted right here is often our perception of what will happen if we tell the truth. And oftentimes we can go to great lengths to reshape what happened in previous years. And people can see right through it. Showing an ability to learn, to grow, and adapt is far more valued by potential donors than face-saving. The truth is an important component to healthy relationships, and at the core of fundraising, it's all about relationships. Donors need to know that they can trust you, and trust your leadership. So, if mistakes were made in the previous last year, you can admit to having made mistakes and follow up with how you are addressing those mistakes and making changes in the following year. Are there questions now? I think I saw a couple blinking. Brendan?
Yeah, so we had a couple of things come through, but again, I would invite folks to put in your questions or comments, and also a special note to those of us who are on Facebook Live. Thanks for joining, and you can also put your comments in on Facebook. Just scroll down to where you'd normally put in a comment or question on a post, and I will relay those to Erin. So we want to be able to include those joining on Facebook too. So we had, of course, the question about the annual campaign. There was a comment from St. Michael's in Lansing. Would love to see a list of whys that you list on our when talking about with number 4, which was the focus on the why, not the need. Do you have any sort of like maybe things off the top of your mind that might be included on that? There were some great questions that you mentioned. Maybe kind of like help jumpstart some thoughts on that. Or maybe if you have, and I've always don't want to forget the knowledge out there in the room as well, so that if you've organized a campaign around some of these whys, please would invite you to share those in the chat.
Yeah, some very initial whys. I always tell people to go back to the question, what is God calling you to be and to do? What are your core values? That is always a central place to begin. What is God doing now in your faith community that we need to pay attention to? How will our gifts empower us to ensure that our parish's vision become a reality? That's an important why. Why is your church relevant now? Why do people need this faith community now?
Sounds good. Thank you, Erin. Can I maybe copy out some of that and put some of those questions that you've listed into the chat for our participants?
I would be delighted. Thank you,
Great.
Brendan.
I will do that really soon. Other than that, I am not seeing any other questions at the moment, so I think we can go ahead and press on.
Excellent. All right. A next strategy. Show gratitude in donor-centric ways beyond a thank you note. An important theological component of stewardship is the act of saying thank you. We're entrusted with gifts, and we respond with gratitude. Whether they're from God or from one another, humans are hardwired for gratitude, and to say thank you serves a number of very important purposes. So, how many of you knew how many times do you thank those who pledge in your parish? There's a best practice attached to that. The best practice for nonprofits is to thank their donors 7 times per year. Rest assured, this does not mean 7 different handwritten notes. That's a question I always get. Why do we need to thank? One, it acknowledges a giver's generosity, but there are other reasons as well. And prior to our start, we talked a bit about what are ways in which we can increase a culture of generosity. Here are some important components to that. Saying thank you informs a giver of how their gift was used. Saying thank you provides a vehicle for formation for folks in our faith community to talk about how gifts are used. It may provide an additional opportunity for an invitation. And it fosters a deeper sense of engagement to the community. So actually, before we move on, I want to tell a quick story. I know that we have a team here from Lansing, Michigan. I like to tell the story about St. John's Episcopal Church in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. They adopted a discipline of gratitude a few years ago. And members of the vestry met with each of the ministry committees because they determined that they wanted year-round to say thank you as a way of building up a culture of giving. So each vestry member determined a ministry in which they were going to adopt, and every month determine a way to say thank you. They brought that ministry pastries and cookies. They lifted them up during the announcements. They continued to send emails and notes. They highlighted it on their Facebook page. They were very intentional about showing very public gratitude. So one member of the parish who owns a local grocery was so taken by this approach, they now include a round robin thank you at their grocery store in his meetings. Each week a member is invited at the grocery store to share a story of gratitude from their work. It began to have a life larger than the parish. Another member was a social worker, and she was surprised to receive a heartfelt thank you from her boss at work. It was the first time in 4 years that she had received a thank you. The rector told me some of these stories and said, you know, gratitude is really contagious. And then said something very wise and said, what would happen if everyone in the world started to do this? Started to show stewardship through the act of gratitude. And so I want to provide you with some very concrete ways. And a quick reminder, Brendan has included in the comments section a PDF link where you can download all of these suggestions. And so you'll be able to utilize these later. But these are some very practical ways in which I've seen churches say thank you all year round. I described assigning a vestry member to a ministry. Short videos of thanks. This is a terrific way to highlight ministries, people in front of ministries, determining budget allocations for those ministries, and creating a sense of engagement. So what does this mean? It means that one church I was working with created a 22-second video, 22 seconds on their iPhone, where they had the children all get together and say, thank you. That was it. And then what they did was they sent this out to all those that donated and said, thank you. It's because of your gift that 22% of our budget is used for children's ministries. These are the faces that are touched by your gift. Great way to say thank you and for people to also have that sense of connection. Another great way is I saw that a church did a video of a choir singing and did the exact same thing. Brief clip of the choir singing. They stopped it. They said, thank you. The choir director said, it's because of your gift that we are able to make music for God together. Facebook posts with relevant hashtags. This is becoming very popular. One of the things that I just saw today, the rector of St. Michael and All Angels, they created bags for the eclipse, like a moon pie and the Oreos. And he was like, this is why I love my parish. And he hashtagged St. Michael and All Angels. And I thought, yes, that's a great way to say thank you. Monthly thanks texts. This is a very quick way to say thank you for people to receive that thank you text. And it requires no postage. It's just a 5-second text where people feel a greater connection. Monthly postcards with faces. I've had ministry groups print out faces of their ministries and write out, thank you, it's because of your gift we have a thriving ministry. Small reminder gifts throughout the year. When you turn on the heat, maybe you might want to send out red hots when there's air conditioning, peppermint patties, magnets, mugs, dried flowers, small pictures, 100 grand for the first 100 grand in the budget. These are small, fun little gifts that communicate a sense of gratitude. Pictures, when appropriate, from recipients. Thank you events throughout the year. And highlight major donor giving in the community as our parishioners. This is something that is very important. Oftentimes you might have some folks in your parish that are giving to other places. And they might make a very generous donation to a local library, local community center. Instead of seeing this as competition, this is a terrific way to say, this is one of our parishioners, and to perhaps publicly thank them either by Facebook or through a shout out in the monthly newsletter to communicate a sense of pride that there's such a level of generosity at your parish.
And if I can also jump in a little quickly, Erin, with that,
Yeah.
also letting your folks know as well that you can pledge to more than one church, which I think was one of my favorite places, questions that I got. And I came out of parish ministry, and we had several folks that were snowbirds or sort of reverse snowbirds as well, and came to us at the opposite times of the year. And it was like, no, you can also pledge here, even if you have your membership at a different church. We would love to have your pledge of support. So again, that same question, like the woman who said, what is a pledge? Even some very faithful Episcopalians may not even necessarily know, like, yeah, you can share that, your pledge, and you can pledge to more than one place.
That's a great point, Brendan. I'm really glad that you raised that. The next slide is one in which I encounter probably the most often. A very important practical strategy is when you are inviting someone to make a gift, either verbally or in written form, don't bury the lead. What does that mean? So the term bury the lead actually comes from journalism. In a news story, the lead is the first sentence, which concisely conveys the main point of what's happening, of the story. Ideally, a reader could, or a listener could gain what is the purpose of this communication very quickly. Come away with a clear idea of what is being asked, or what is the story about. A good lead will also hook someone, will also connect with the person that's being engaged with. A story with a buried lead begins with secondary details, perhaps some filler that's not really necessary, and it leaves people with wondering, so what was the point of this interaction? So every fall, my mailbox, I'm sure yours is too, is full of long, lengthy letters asking for a donation to various causes. And I can always tell if the individual writing is comfortable with the language of giving by the amount of text used to explain why they're inviting me to give. Whether it be a theological explanation, a logistical overview of expenses, maybe an emotional narrative, the invitation of, will you join me in giving to our parish, can get quickly buried. Sometimes the invitation is left out altogether. That's happened before. Now, don't get me wrong. Theological explanation, logistical overview of finances, and a compelling narrative are all very important, and I do not want to negate them in any way. However, people can miss the reason for your communication or grow even frustrated in trying to decipher the meaning of your text. Fundraising as ministry requires a commitment to healthy relationships through clear communication. One key way to foster healthy relationships is to communicate intent and expectations in ways that can be both received and heard. Because, as we know from strategy number 4, people won't give if they don't know they're being invited. I one time was talking to a rector who bravely confessed, I just get so nervous with my communications about money. I'd rather just talk about something I'm more comfortable with, like theology or liturgy or maybe my dog. And I understand that. And at the same time, as we're trying to move fundraising from a means to an end to a vital and life-giving ministry for your parish, this is an opportunity for both you and those that you're speaking with to explore their relationship with money and how you can potentially draw closer to God through your giving. So don't bury the lead by hiding your invitation in text. This is an important opportunity for members of your parish to hear and receive an invitation to give.
So again, any questions, please utilize the chat box. Again, if you happen to open that up, if you're in the Zoom webinar room, look on the upper left-hand side of your screen and press chat, and then you'll offer that opportunity. I see, and some people are using the Q&A function as well. Diane has asked, talking about this as fundraising feels like a sea of difference from discussing stewardship. Is this to reach millennials and post-millennials? And she also adds, I may have missed this if it was discussed already. She's still at work.
So we are utilizing and adopting an approach of fundraising as ministry. And so I use the language of fundraising in and throughout. But fundraising itself is part of stewardship. Stewardship is an overall theology of giving that includes both invitation and gratitude. And fundraising within that self is that place where the invitation is given for transformation. That transformative aspect is vital right now, because as discussed in the beginning of this presentation, we are seeing new donor motivations, and there is even greater opportunity for us to connect with a motivation around rage and catharsis with a theology that is life-giving and meaning-making. There are ways in which we can connect and show our own meaning-making in the world.
Great, thank you, Erin. And also just want to put a word out to our Facebook Live folks. If you would like to ask a question, just go ahead and put a comment or question in on the post with the live stream, and I will relay that to Erin. Judy asked, what about the book Theology of Money? I'm not sure, Judy, if you're referring to the book that Erin was talking about earlier. That's the one by the Henry Nouwen, which is an awesome book. I encourage everyone to check that out if you have not read that. It's a great, great, great asset to have for anyone involved in stewardship. Or Erin, I don't know if you maybe thought if there was some other book that she might be referring to.
So there is a book called The Theology of Money. It was from the Duke University Press by Philip Goodchild. And it's more of a philosophical book that examines through the lens of Karl Marx and such. Certainly, my intent for this hour was to combine both a robust theology of giving combined with practical strategies. However, I always recommend if there are opportunities in which you as a parish can explore your own theology of giving through various lenses as a group, I recommend it. And so the theology of money may be one tool of many to use throughout the year.
Great, thanks, Erin. And then Kate asks, how much do you suggest communicating?
Yeah.
I have heard, and we'll get the slides back up on the screen, don't worry everyone, that she's heard that people who communicate what their average pledge is, the highest pledge, etc., with the argument being that people learn where they fall and can evaluate if they should move closer to an average pledge, hopefully by more. But what do you think about that, sort of providing those statistics and numbers?
So I would go back to, excuse me for scrolling through very quickly, I would go back to your segmented lists and looking to see who are those that are in your pews and determining what are their needs. So if you have a number of people that would fall within this $500 to $2,000 range, that would be a significant number of folks of that growth potential piece, then perhaps those statistics would be very helpful. if you have people that perhaps don't have that type of capacity, perhaps a different approach is necessary. So I think that can be very helpful with communication, but it always comes down to what are the needs of those that are in your pews.
Great, thanks, Erin.
Yeah.
So we'll quickly flip back up to
Yes.
number 9.
Thank you for keeping me on track. So when we were describing earlier about the why, I discussed with you a bit about how abundance theology may not connect with those that are in your pews. And so I'd like to highlight with you a new frame, a new language. What's wrong with abundance? Nothing. Nothing is wrong with abundance. And in fact, we serve an abundant God. But there is some potential discomfort with those that may feel as though they have been systematically disenfranchised. So I like to tell this story. I recently attended a training where I was asked to read a book where the author challenged us to think about that we had all won the lottery. And that was a way in which we were to tap into our abundance. And by determining how we had won the lottery, we would be able to tap into that abundance and be able to communicate a sense of gratitude. The problem with the lottery is that there are winners and there are losers. And there is even administrative fee that's taken out, which I'm sure was not the intended analysis there. But truly, it does seem as though there are folks, for example, in the foster care, or folks that have fallen through the cracks of schools, et cetera, in which tapping into that language can feel as though it's pastorally inappropriate. So in 1999, Walter Brueggemann is the one who first created that framework of abundance and scarcity. He wrote an article for Christian Century, The Liturgy of Abundance, The Myth of Scarcity, Consumerism and Religious Life. It is the piece that set the language. And yet, I almost spit out my coffee when I read it, because instead of how it's being used now, it was actually an argument proposing redistribution of funds. Now, I am not tonight arguing for the redistribution of funds. That's not my intent at all. But rather, what I suggest is that the theology of abundance has been misused and can often be very painfully manipulated. And so we need to be very careful with the language when we're thinking about this as a ministry and how it connects with those. For example, you might have, to our earlier question, a number of millennials and post-millennials, right now being called boomlets, who have a large amount of debt, who went to school with the promise of being able to pay back that debt with good jobs, and then 2008 hit. And that language of abundance from those that maybe communicated those expectations can be a real source of pain. I was recently leading a group of millennials and around a conversation and about what was your earliest experience with money. And what every last one of them said was the downturn of the economy in 2008. That was their first experience. So paying attention to those that are in your pews means then thinking through what is a language that is life-giving, that demonstrates our own theology of giving. So rather than continuing to use abundance, perhaps one way that we can frame giving is to look at our own baptismal covenant, where it says that we are called to reconcile ourselves to God and to one another. It also connects with initially what I talked about, that Jewish theology of repairing the world. This is our way in which, through fundraising, we are able to connect with a people that are seeking catharsis. And I would argue people that are seeking to demonstrate their rage and catharsis perhaps may be looking for reconciliation as well. A wonderful way to align your stewardship theology with others' values. 10, claim this as a holy work with courage and confidence. I once had an individual say this to me. I'm sorry to have to ask you, but would you be willing to give this year to our church? And I heard the pause and I heard her shame. A couple years ago, I was training a group of volunteers in Wisconsin on how to make an invitation in a one-to-one setting. And one of the volunteers was recruited by the leadership of the parish, but not for her desire to work, but because of her deep relationships in the community. And it was clear from the very beginning that she was deeply uncomfortable with asking others to join her in giving. And she was holding me responsible for her discomfort. And it was evidenced by that evil eye that she gave me throughout the training. When we moved to a place where I asked them to role play, she began with, I'm sorry to have to ask you, but would you be willing to give to our parish this year? I asked her to adopt, as I've asked all of you to adopt, a lens of fundraising as a ministry. When meeting with individuals, see this as an opportunity to pray with others, to learn about their needs, to seek to connect them with Jesus. 2 weeks later, she called me and her voice was thick with emotion. She said to me, I never knew it could be like this. During her visits, she shared stories. She cried with those that were in need. She learned some things about her fellow parishioners that they hadn't been able to share publicly. And she prayed with them. She was surprised that she was thanked consistently for these visits and for the invitation itself. And in the end, this reluctant worker who gave me an evil eye, she was transformed. She was transformed by her asking and by the ministry of fundraising. So, I always like to end this with a few practical next steps. I've given you a lot to think about. A great first next step would be to print out the slides so you have everything in front of you. Another great next step, this is an easy low-hanging fruit, is determine who is in your pews, what are their communication needs? What's a great way to connect? Get data, segment out previous giving lists, figure out where you might have some potential. Examine your existing language around giving and determine if there's an intersection between people's current needs and your missional identity, and articulate this connection with courage and with conviction. All right, Brendan, I believe we have one last minute for questions.
We do. We have a little bit of time left and we've got some questions coming in. Please feel free to go ahead and ask those. We'll try to get to as many as we can as we wrap up this evening. But I wanted to make sure that we got around to the question that we had from, if I can find this again, from Martha saying, language of generosity seems a little outdated. Do you have suggested language for communications that is fresh?
Yes, yes. So I agree with you. Language of generosity, I think, connects with a particular demographic and it doesn't connect with all demographics. So thinking through when we're talking about advocacy-based organizations, they're using the language of repair. They're using the language of reconcile. They're using the language of fix, to change. These are really powerful words, and they are deeply rooted in our baptismal covenant.
And following up to that, Kate was asking what the word you used for the generation after millennials. We heard a bunch of different things. They're having a lively discussion. And if I heard correctly, it was boomlets.
So
Or
I
sorry, no, or whatever. What was it?
so there are lots of names for it. Post millennial is certainly one. Boomlet was one. We are still waiting. Pew often is the one as the go-to for naming. Pew Data and Research is the go-to for naming that generation. So let's keep an eye out for what that name will be. But as of recently, Boomlet has been the one that has been identified as the potential.
Great, thanks, Erin. And Deborah, I think this is a great question to close on, asked that she came from a parish where it was customary for the rector to know the pledge amount, and that this was referenced in the thank you letter that the rector would write, but came to another parish where the parishioners were very disturbed that the rector was aware of the amount of their pledge. And do we recommend whether or not rectors are aware of the amount that people pledge, or should that just be left to the treasurer, the senior warden?
So I'd ask you to return to my slide number 2, where it says that Episcopalians are not a monolithic body. Truly, I find that parishes that have a culture where the clergy is aware and can readily talk about giving releases that sense of shame and secrecy. And when you can do that, you can have healthy and vibrant relationships. So that's optimal. However, if you are involved in a parish that the clergy does not know, there are ways in which you can build a very robust theology and a robust culture as well. And if you would like, I'm always happy to help think that through. So know that it's not an end all, but it is, I believe, optimal for the clergy to know.
Great. And I'll put a link to a great article that Erin put together where she also pulled her fellow fundraising experts on this very topic as well, which I know sometimes I find surprising how controversial it can be, but hopefully can help those of you who are dealing with that topic. Thank you so much, Erin. We are just past 8 o'clock, so it's time to wrap up. Want to thank everyone for being a part of this webinar this evening, for all your great questions and comments. It was great hearing from you. Again, thank you to Erin for putting together this wonderful presentation with this wealth of information. Before everyone heads off, I just want to note that in your inbox, check your email if you aren't planning on grabbing your phone or email right away, and there should be a link to a survey. Please take a moment to click on that link and spend a couple of minutes providing some feedback. We do read over every single one of your responses, and we, of course, will share this with Erin to let her know about this webinar, as well as looking to figure out what it is that we're going to put together for our next season of webinars. So please take that time, because your responses inform us greatly and are so invaluable for us for putting together the content for helping to strengthen our great Episcopal congregations. So without any other business, I just say thank you again, and God bless and Godspeed in your annual giving campaigns. Look forward to hearing from you. And please, as you see on the slide, contact us with any questions. We are happy to be in touch with you. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.